What if the part of you causing problems in your leadership is not your weakness? What if it's the part of you that got left behind while you were becoming successful? Today I want to talk about the executive shadow.
The executive shadow, the hidden side of leadership identity, and why the traits you disowned on the way up may now be quietly running the show.
Because sometimes the next stage of your leadership is not about adding more capability. Sometimes it is becoming less divided. Welcome. I am Pietro Pazzi. I spent 30 years as a global executive before becoming a depth coach. I work with senior leaders who are navigating exactly this kind of transition, where the identity that got them to the top has stopped being enough. Most people think leadership growth means becoming more skilled, better strategy, better communication, better influence, better decision making. And of course, all of that has its place. But there's another layer that often gets ignored, especially at the senior level. It is the question of identity. Who have you had to become in order to succeed? Think about that one. And just as importantly, what part of you did you have to suppress to become that person? This is where Carl Jung becomes surprisingly interesting and relevant to executive leadership. In 1913, Jung was not some lost beginner trying to find himself. He was already successful. He had reputation, he had influence, a thriving practice, and a major intellectual partnership. Then the story holding his life together began to collapse. He later described this as losing the myth he had been living by, the inner story that organized his ambition, his choices, and his sense of who he was. What followed became part of the work now known through the Red Book, Jung's private journal of inner exploration. Now, most executives are not sitting in a Swiss study drawing symbolic images in a red leather book. Well, maybe not. But the leadership pattern is familiar. You can have the role, the reputation, the track record, the authority, and still feel that the identity underneath it has become unstable. This is not always burnout. It is not always a lack of confidence. It may be that the professional identity that once organized your life has become too narrow for the person you are becoming. And when that happens, the shadow starts to matter. You use the word individuation to describe the lifelong process of becoming more whole, not more impressive. More whole. Career advancement and inner development are not the same thing. You can be promoted many times and still become less integrated as a person. In fact, leadership often rewards a narrower and narrower version of you. You learn what gets approved. Be decisive, be composed, be strategic, be resilient, be the person who can handle it. And slowly, without meaning to, you start editing yourself. The doubt gets hidden. The anger gets polished. The softness gets buried. The need for approval gets disguised as high standards. The fear gets renamed as control. And because the system rewards performance, you assume the performance is who you are, but it isn't. It is an adaptation. A successful one, mind you, but it is an adaptation. Here's a simple example. A leader builds a career on being the one who never panics, calm in crisis, clear under pressure, always steady. That becomes their brand. But over time, they lose access to their own truth. They cannot admit when something feels uncertain. They cannot say, I don't know yet. They cannot let the room see them thinking. So they keep performing certainty. And the team stops telling the truth because the leader's identity leaves no room for uncertainty. That is the cost. Most people think the danger is having weaknesses. But the deeper danger is having an identity so polished that nothing honest can get through. Individuation asks a different question, not how do I become more impressive, but what part of me needs to be included now if I am going to lead from a deeper center. The shadow is what got left behind on the way up. It is not simply the bad part of you. It is the disowned part of you. The part of you that did not fit the identity you needed in order to survive, belong, or even succeed. For many leaders, the shadow might be anger. They are always reasonable, always measured, always diplomatic. But under pressure, that unowned anger leaks out as sarcasm, impatience, or quiet contempt. For another leader, the shadow might be ambition. They present as collaborative and humble, but secretly resent anyone who gets ahead of them. For another, it might be softness. They are so committed to being strong that they cannot receive care, admit fatigue, or let anyone close enough to support them. And here's what Jung discovered. What you disown does not disappear. It goes underground. And when it goes underground, it starts operating without your consent. This is where leadership gets dangerous. The blind spot everyone can see except yourself. The overreaction that seems to come from nowhere. The repeated hiring mistakes. The strategic decisions that look rational but is really driven by fear. The meeting where you think you are being clear but everyone else experiences you as punishing. Shadow work is not about indulging every impulse. It is not about saying, well, this is just who I am. That is not integration. That is avoidance in a new outfit. Real shadow work means bringing disowned material back under conscious management. So, anger becomes clarity. Ambition becomes clean desire. Fear becomes information. Softness becomes connection. Doubt becomes discernment. The goal is not to become perfectly balanced. The goal is to stop being secretly governed by what you refuse to know about yourself. The leader who knows the shadow becomes safer under pressure because they are no longer outsourcing their unconscious material to the environment or the people around them. Jung also spoke of archetypes, deep patterns of behavior that show up across human life. You do not have to accept everything that Jung says, all his theories, but a lot of it is very useful. In leadership, for instance, archetypes, we see these patterns all the time. The hero, the ruler, the caregiver, the rebel, the sage, and there's many others. These are not just job titles, they are inner roles. And under pressure, leaders often collapse into one of them. The hero leader, for example, rescues everyone. They are the fixer, the firefighter, the one who jumps in when things get messy. At first, this looks noble. But over time, the team does not grow because the hero keeps making themselves necessary. The ruler leader wants control. They bring order, standards, and structure. That can be useful, but when overdone, they mistake control for leadership and compliance for trust. The caregiver leader protects people. They are warm, loyal, and supportive. But if they over-identify with that pattern, they avoid hard conversations because they do not want anyone to feel hurt. Then there's the sage leader who sees complexity. They ask thoughtful questions, but they can hide in analysis and delay the moment of decision. The problem is not the pattern itself. Each one contains wisdom. The problem is over-identification with one of them. You stop using the pattern and the pattern starts using you. You say, this is just how I lead. But often it is not how you lead, it is how you protect yourself. So the question becomes, which leadership pattern do you collapse into under pressure? Do you rescue? Do you control? Do you please? Do you withdraw into analysis? Do you rebel against authority even when collaboration would serve the work? This kind of naming is powerful because once you can see the pattern, you are no longer trapped inside it. You have choice, and choice is one of the clearest signs of inner development. So here's a practical exercise you can do today. Write down these 3 questions and take some time to reflect and answer them. The first question, what part of myself did I have to suppress to become successful? The second question, what pattern do I fall into under pressure? And the third question, what would change if I led from my center, not my role? Now, do not overthink these. Write quickly. The first answer is often the most honest one. You can always go back and reflect on that again. Then choose one small action. For example, if you disowned anger, have a clean conversation you have been avoiding. If you disown softness, let someone support you without turning it into a performance. If you over-identified with the hero, do not rescue the team this week, coach them instead. If you over-identified with the ruler, ask one real question before giving direction. And if you over-identified with the sage, make the decision you have been circling. This is not about personal reinvention. It is about one conscious interruption of the unconscious pattern. That is how integration begins, not with a new identity statement, but with a different behavior under pressure. So here's the deeper truth. Your job is not your center. Your title is not your center. Your achievements are not your center. They may matter. They may be meaningful. They may represent years of sacrifice, but they cannot be the deepest you behind the leadership role. Because if your identity depends entirely on being impressive, needed, right, strong, or in control, then every challenge becomes a threat to your existence. And now that's exhausting. And it makes leadership so much smaller than it needs to be. Jung distinguishes the ego, the identity built around role, status, and conscious self-image from the self, the deeper organizing center. In leadership language, we might say it like this. There's the role you perform, and there is the person who must become larger enough to hold the role without being consumed by it. That is the work. Not to abandon ambition, not to reject success, not to become endlessly introspective, but to build a center that does not collapse when the room changes. The executive shadow is not your enemy. It is the unfinished business of your success. And if you are willing to meet it, it can become a source of depth, honesty, and cleaner authority. Because the leaders people trust most are not the ones with no shadow. They are the ones who have stopped pretending they do not have one. So maybe the next stage is not about becoming more powerful. Maybe it is about becoming more whole. And from that place, power becomes less performative, less anxious, less defended, more human, more grounded, and more trustworthy. Quick reminder before I continue, I have several free resources available on my website to support your leadership journey. I've left the link in the description. If this spoke to something in you, I'd love you to subscribe, because on this channel we'll explore leadership, identity, inner work, transition, transformation, and what it means to live and lead with more depth. And if you are a leader who has achieved a lot outwardly but sense something deeper is now asking for attention, I invite you to explore my leadership depth coaching on petropatsi.com. If you're not sure where to start, have a look at some of the resources I have available on my page. There's several assessments and other tools to give you some direction. You can also book a complimentary 30-minute exploratory chat with me. I've left the link for my website and the chat in the description. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to hearing from you. Love your feedback, and see you in the next video.